皆さんこんにちは。核若広島共同代表の田中美穂です。私は今ここ広島の平和公園内からお届けしています。私の後ろには慰霊碑や原爆ドームもご覧いただけます。ロシアによるウクライナ侵攻、そしてプーチン大統領の核使用の威嚇を受けて、これまでの核廃絶の運動がまた遠ざかってしまったのではないか。また被爆地広島、長崎、そしてグローバル被爆者の方々の声は届いてなかったのか、そういった思いになった方も多くいらっしゃったと思います。しかし私たちはそんな時だからこそ、また核廃絶の声を大きく上げ続けていかなければいけません。私たちが核廃絶の道に突き進むのか、または脅し合うことでしか成り立たない核抑止、そして軍拡競争へと突き進むのか、私たちは今岐路に立っています。私が今収録を行っている1週間後には、オーストリア・ウィーンにて核兵器禁止条約第1回締約国会議が開催されます。これまで核廃絶に関わってこられたたくさんの方々が一堂に会し、核廃絶に向けた具体的な道のりを話し合うことに私は希望を持っています。今日は人生を核廃絶に捧げてこられた3人の方々にご登場いただき、核廃絶の現状や私たちにできることについてお話しいただきます。それでは早速お一人目をご紹介いたします。お一人目は NPO 団体ニュークリアウォッチニューメキシコ代表のジェイ・コグランさんです。ジェイ・コグランさんはこれまでロスアラモス国立研究所にてアメリカの核開発の最前線を研究され続けてこられました。ジェイさんはまた富士山に登頂されるなど登山家としての一面も持っていらっしゃいます。J さんには核開発の現状やそれに関わる国々の動きについてお話ししていただきます。
And so I give my greetings to the people of Japan. I visited your beautiful country when I was a child. I hope to go back there again sometime. It's truly a beautiful, beautiful country. So we have the current geopolitical tensions of today, all that became worse in the last couple of months with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we have the very specific case of where the Russian President Putin ordered that the Russian deterrence forces go to a special mode of combat duty, and that any intervening country, he of course was referring to NATO countries, and the U.S. would face, quote, consequences they've never seen. So that's a pretty explicit threat, something that we've not seen the likes of that since the middle 1980s. So this is really going back in time the wrong way. At the same time, we have China, India, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, and the United Kingdom all numerically expanding their nuclear weapons stockpiles. China is building some 600 new hardened silos for intercontinental ballistic missiles. Speaking to you people of Japan, North Korea is a serious threat. And finally, the impact that that's having on the United States is that President Biden is in the process of releasing what is called a nuclear posture review. That's kind of the highest level policy document. And all the reports are that that too is going back in time just because of the regressive geopolitical situation. So in short, the news is not good here. With respect to my own country, we still have some more than 3,700 active nuclear weapons, and our dismantlements, I think this is pathetic, but our dismantlements have slowed to only some 75 warheads a year. The United States is rebuilding its existing nuclear weapons with new military capabilities and is getting ready to produce totally new designs as well. To add to this, we have major new nuclear weapons production plants expected to be operational until at least the year 2080. And to invoke the old cliche, if they build it, they will use it. In addition, the U.S. is acquiring at tremendous taxpayers' expense new heavy strategic bombers, new strategic submarines, and new ballistic and cruise missiles to deliver these new nuclear warheads. Now, I want to get into one of the core principles in that all my life I've been sold the pitch that our nuclear weapons are all about deterring others. But that is only, I would say, half true. In reality, the United States and Russia both have thousands of weapons for the express purpose of being able to wage a nuclear war. And, don't trust just me to say it. This is actually officially declared policy of the United States Defense Department, in which it explicitly rejected minimal deterrence. And again, that is why we have thousands of nuclear weapons for nuclear warfighting, rather than just the few hundred needed for just deterrence alone. And towards that end, the United States is currently implementing, it's about in its fifth year now, of a $1.7 trillion so-called modernization program that'll be a complete extreme makeover of U.S. nuclear forces. This includes new intercontinental ballistic missiles, new cruise missiles, heavy stealth bombers, and new submarines. As I stated earlier, complete rebuild of all the nuclear warheads with new military capabilities. And this, in short, is a program of nuclear weapons forever. So now I move to part two, and what I hope might be Japan's role in nuclear disarmament. And I believe I state the obvious, and again, I express deep regrets that my own country dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. But because of that, clearly Japan, in my view, has the foremost moral authority in the world to lead us all towards global nuclear disarmament. However, as you all know, the Japanese government's official position is that it is under the umbrella of the extended nuclear deterrence of the United States. And here I just give a quote from the U.S. State Department in April 2021 about how the dialogue, the talk between Japan and the United States, how the longevity of that attests to the unwavering U.S. commitment to the defense of Japan through the full range of its capabilities, and here I emphasize, including nuclear weapons. Now, the Japanese Foreign Ministry, of course, reciprocates. It too notes the indispensability of strengthening the Japan-U.S. security arrangements and to enhance the deterrence of the Japan-U.S. alliance. But my main point, the main thing that I would like to get across to you all is there is no such thing as just deterrence. What we have is a hybrid of deterrence and nuclear warfighting plans. And those warfighting plans, if ever executed, are not likely to remain limited, which will result in all-out nuclear war, nuclear winter, et cetera, et cetera. So what to do? And, I shouldn't preach to the Japanese people, but I would like to suggest that this is what you should do. The Japanese people should pressure their government to, in turn, pressure the U.S. government to honor the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which, after all, went into effect, 50 years ago now. And in fact, it was the United States that was the principal organizer and initiator of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but yet my country fails to live up to it. And specifically, what I'm referring to is the NPT's Article 6 mandate that nuclear weapons states must pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures related to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament. And of course, 50 years later, the United States and the other weapon states have never even begun to do that. And we have a specific event coming up that the review conference for the Non-Proliferation Treaty will be held in the month of August at the United Nations. And that review conference is likely to be contentious between the nuclear weapon states and the non-weapon states because of the increasing nuclear threats and the modernization programs. But what I'm trying to suggest is this is an appropriate time for the Japanese people to pressure their government to, in turn, pressure the American government. Now, we also have another event, important event coming up before that at the third week of this June, we have the first meeting of the state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this treaty is not yet 2 years old. But I would argue that the Japanese people, first of all, should pressure their government to send an official observer to that state parties meeting. And over the longer term, the Japanese people should pressure their government to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And I had a wonderful father who took me up Mount Fujiyama when I was 12 years old. And the picture you see here, the wooden frame around the picture is made from the walking sticks that we used walking up Fujiyama. So I actually feel, call it a deep affinity to both Japan and Fujiyama in particular, the first big mountain I ever walked up. And I go on, I like to also quote Martin Luther King, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. And I'm telling you, the people of Japan, that together we will get to the mountaintop overlooking the promised land because we don't have a choice. We simply have to abolish nuclear weapons before they abolish us. But that said, we're going to have to work really hard to do so. So let's all gather our strength towards that end and get the job done. Thank you very much.
ここまで核開発の最前線についてご覧いただきました。さて、次はスージー・スナイダーさんにご登場いただきましょう。スージーさんは2017年ノーベル平和賞を受賞した ICAN 核廃絶国際キャンペーンのメンバーです。また、Don't Bank on the Bomb 核兵器にお金を貸すなキャンペーンを展開されており、どういった企業・金融機関が核産業にお金を投資したか、または投資引き上げを行ったかなどについてリサーチし、データを公表されています。私たちが普段あまり考えることのない金融の世界から核廃絶について考えてみましょう。
Hi, I'm Susie Snyder, and for the last 10 years or so, I've worked on the Don't Bank on the Bomb project. Don't Bank on the Bomb is a joint project between the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons and PAX, which is a Dutch peace organization. By getting investors, banks, pension funds, asset managers, to stop investing in companies that produce the key components for nuclear weapons, we want to change the nuclear weapons industry. This will help create the conditions needed to totally eliminate and fully abolish nuclear weapons. We have some great tools to do this type of work. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is the only international multilateral treaty that requires verified and complete nuclear disarmament. It's the only international treaty that makes the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons illegal. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is one of the core tools that we have to change the world and to finally put an end to the legacy of nuclear weapons. And it's using this treaty that we have started to change behavior of the financial sector and change the behavior of companies that were involved in the production of nuclear weapons. What we're asking people to do is to stop investing, stop trying to make a profit from the companies that produce the world's worst weapons. Nuclear weapons are catastrophic. The threat of nuclear weapons is dangerous, and we are at a grave risk right now of the possible use of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons make us feel hopeless. They make us feel like there's nothing we can do, but that's not true. We can change the industry behind nuclear weapons. We can get these companies to stop building the components for nuclear weapons. But we can only do that together. We've had some success since we started this project. I think when we first looked at what financial institutions, what banks or pension funds prevent investments in nuclear weapons producers, we found that most of them don't have any sort of policy, one way or another. Most of them just didn't say anything about nuclear weapons. But now, more than 100 financial institutions around the world say no to nuclear weapons. They say these weapons are a problem. They're something we need to be concerned about. They're something we have to make sure we are not associated with. Those 100 institutions represent $35 trillion worth of assets in the global marketplace. That represents 8% of global financing around the world. Since the treaty went into effect, one British company, Serco, stopped its involvement in the UK nuclear arsenal. It was asked, are you going to rebid on new contracts? Its contract had ended. Is it going to go back and go for new contracts? And it said no. Serco said it would no longer seek any contracts connected to nuclear weapons because of pressure from investors. Because nuclear weapons do not fit in an environmental, social, and governance criteria. Nuclear weapons do not fit in a business plan that wants to support the Sustainable Development Goals. Nuclear weapons and the Sustainable Development Goals are incompatible. How can you sustain our world? How can you help our planet if you are supporting or financing the companies to make the weapons that would destroy it? They are incompatible. In Japan, this is a big deal because so much of the Japanese financial sector is in support of the Sustainable Development Goals and looks to finance projects that help those goals, that help our society to thrive, to survive. There are some Japanese banks that still invest in companies involved in the production of nuclear weapons, and this has to stop. They need to understand that when they invest in these companies or their subsidiaries, they're sending a message that nuclear weapons are okay. Some of the companies involved in producing nuclear weapons are very large companies that do a lot of different things, like Boeing or Airbus. We all know them as companies that make airplanes, but they also make nuclear missiles. And that is not acceptable. And so what we can do is say very clearly and ask our banks to say very clearly to these companies, we want to support you. But we can't as long as you still have this small fraction of your overall business connected to the production of nuclear arms. We can't support any companies that help make nuclear weapons a reality. We have to change that. And we are starting to do so. Japanese banks need to take a really hard look at what it is that they are investing in, and especially those who say they will not invest in inhumane or controversial weapons. They need to understand that it does not matter who owns the weapon. The weapon is the problem. Some of these banks, they use the excuse and say the Non-Proliferation Treaty lets 5 countries keep their nuclear bombs. But that is not true. The Non-Proliferation Treaty requires those countries to negotiate their nuclear disarmament. And we have new international law. We have a new standard. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons means nothing to do with nuclear weapons is acceptable. And that's the standard by which we must judge investment. Is there any risk that the companies involved are involved in any of the things prohibited under the ban treaty? If there's a risk of that, then we need to remove them from our investment portfolios. For the people of Japan, the big thing to keep in mind is when a bank is investing in these companies, they're using your money. You have a right and a responsibility to talk to the bank about what they're using your money to do. Are they using your money to support the Sustainable Development Goals, or are they using your money to support the production of nuclear weapons? It's your money. So I encourage you to go into the bank and start a conversation at the bank. Ask the question, do you have a policy around investment? Ask them if they have a policy on sustainable development goals. What are they doing there? Many banks advertise their support for the sustainable development goals. Why aren't they advertising their support to end nuclear weapons? Go to the bank, ask questions. That conversation, very polite, very friendly conversation, is an opportunity to change how this works. It's by going into the local bank that we've seen banks across the world change their policy. For example, during the negotiations for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a fellow went into his bank in downtown New York. He went every week, and he kept asking and asking, do you have a policy on investing in weapons? Do you have a policy to make sure my money is not invested in weapons? When the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was opened for signature, that bank, Amalgamated Bank, published its policy and said it would not ever invest in the companies associated with nuclear weapons. Because one man decided to go to the bank and ask the question. And he kept going. And it's that kind of persistent dedication, that activism, that action. It's very simple. You just ask the questions. And anyone can do it because it is your money in the bank. It is your money in the pension fund. You have a voice and a way to change the world when it comes to the business of nuclear weapons. We can do this together. We can end nuclear weapons before nuclear weapons end us. And we will do that by working together. We have some tools like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, like Don't Bank on the Bomb. And we have the passion and the commitment, and we have the knowledge. We know if we do not choose the end of nuclear weapons will end us. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So I encourage you, go out today, talk to your bank, start the conversation, and let's see how far it can get.
最後にご紹介するのはジョン・C・ウェスター大司教です。アメリカ西部ニューメキシコ州を管轄するカトリック サンタフェの大司教であり、2017年には広島、長崎をご訪問されました。2022年1月、ウェスター大司教はアメリカ核開発の拠点でもあるサンタフェから教会関係者、そして信者の方々に向けて52ページにも及ぶ司教書簡を書かれました。そこには核兵器を廃絶するべき理由が事細かに述べられています。この書簡はアメリカ政府にも送られました。それではウェスター大司教のお話をお聞きください。
I had the wonderful opportunity to visit Japan in 2017, and I was there with two brother bishops, and we met with other Catholic bishops in Japan and other faith leaders, and all kinds of wonderful opportunities that we had. We're basically on vacation, but we really wanted to make the most of this opportunity to really soak in the beautiful countryside, the beautiful culture, the beautiful people of Japan, and it was truly a time in my life that I'll never forget. I have to say, though, that our visits to Hiroshima and Nagasaki were very sobering. Of course, I knew about the dropping of the atomic bombs, the only time it's ever been used in war, but actually being there and seeing the devastation that was caused and going to the museums, etc., it was very, very difficult for me to take it in. I remember especially being very shocked to hear about the school children on those fateful days who ran to the windows because they saw the bright light. And of course, in our particular Catholic faith tradition, we believe that Christ is the light of the world, the light that pierces the darkness and that brings new life. That light in 1945 was obscene and anything but life-giving. One can look at this question, of course, from many perspectives, but for me as a pastor, remembering my visit to Japan, I was listening to the voices of those who were killed those fateful 2 days. I was listening to the voices of those who may have survived the attack but died soon after, or maybe many months after, even years after, because of the devastating effects of an atomic explosion. I thought to myself of T.S. Eliot's poem in the Four Quartets. And I remember he said, "What the dead had no speech for when living, they can tell you being dead. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living." This is my perspective as a pastor. I believe I'm called to listen to people, especially those who suffer, and even those who have died because of their suffering. As G.K. Chesterton once said, tradition means giving votes to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors. It is the democracy of the dead. Tradition refuses to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about. Those of us who happen to be walking about today have created a nuclear arsenal throughout the world that can destroy our planet many times over. It seems to me that we must give those who have died in Japan a vote. We need to listen to them, to their voices crying out to us today. Sadly and tragically, we're in a second arms race today. It's far more dangerous than the first. Pope St. John the 23rd declared that nuclear weapons must be banned. True and lasting peace among nations cannot consist in the possession of an equal supply of armaments, but only in mutual trust. He said that in his very important document, Pacem in Terris. I would also include Pope Benedict XVI, who on his World Day of Peace message, January 1st, 2006, stated, "How can there ever be a future of peace when investments are still made in the production of arms and in research aimed at developing new ones? It can only be hoped that the international community will find the wisdom and courage to take up once more, jointly and with renewed conviction, the process of disarmament, and thus concretely ensure the right to peace enjoyed by every individual and every people." These are very important documents for us Catholics. And we've certainly benefited from them over the years, but we still have a long way to go. And I'm very grateful to Pope Francis, our current pontiff, who has really accelerated this very important moral argument. Recently, Pope Francis has declared unequivocally that the mere possession of nuclear arms is immoral. To me, that changed the entire moral landscape. The mere possession of nuclear arms is immoral. I think that we, people of goodwill, must look at that very seriously. We must look to see what we can do to eradicate our world of nuclear armaments, to rid our world of this very immoral situation we find ourselves in today. The Pope said that now is the time to affirm not only the immorality of the use of nuclear weapons, but the immorality of their possession, thereby clearing the road to nuclear abolition. And on the 75th anniversary of the Hiroshima atomic bomb, he put it plainly, the possessing of nuclear weapons is immoral, period. You and I and all of us are called to be peacemakers, not just an internal conversion, but actually to advocate for peace and to do all that we can to bring about peace. And so I really want to conclude by simply saying that we have to do all that we can to rid our world of nuclear armaments. Meetings, I think, are coming together as a world, as communities, to take up this important task is absolutely essential. I believe that we have to do all that we can to bring about an end to nuclear armaments in our world today. Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. My dear people of Japan, brothers and sisters all, I pray that together we might engage this vital conversation and that it will have tangible results we can all live with. We must not be silent.
ここまで3人の方々のお話をお聞きいただきました。皆さんいかがだったでしょうか。核兵器の廃絶をめぐる現状を知ることができ、そして私たち一人一人にもできることがあるという力強いメッセージをいただくことができたと思います。核兵器のことを考えるとき、私のアクションが果たして世界を変えることができるのかどうか、そう言って不安な気持ちになることがあると思います。私もその一人です。しかし、こうして世界中で核廃絶を訴えて行動していらっしゃる皆さんを見たとき、日本にいる私が何もしないわけにはいかない。日本にいるからこそできることがあるはずだと、そういった強い気持ちになりました。核兵器は人間が生んだものだから、人間が解決することができる。そういったこともよく言われます。そして核兵器を廃絶した後も、私たちは向き合わなければならない課題がたくさん残っています。気候危機、ジェンダーの問題、暴力、差別。これら様々な問題は非常に密接に絡み合っています。そして核兵器の問題に対処することは、そういった問題に声を上げることでもあると私は思います。人類が核兵器の廃絶に向けて声を上げることは、一人一人の尊厳が保たれ、命や権利が大切にされるより良い社会を目指すことにつながると私は信じています。最後に半生を核廃絶に捧げられた湯川秀樹博士の言葉を託して終わりにしたいと思います。湯川博士の言葉、そして今日の3人の言葉を胸に私たちの行動に変えていきましょう。